All right, here we go. Whoa, here we go.
Wow.
We've ever had so many people come at the same time. We got a few people still coming in here.
So for those of you guys who have joined us, we usually give everybody a few minutes to get here. We have a waiting room that keeps filling up, so we are going to let that keep happening. So we can get everybody in here. There's Alan in the waiting room. All right. So I think we could go ahead and do our intro. What do you guys think?
Sure.
All right. All right.
No, let's do it. Let's do it. Just, who's going to give us permission? Awesome. Here we go.
All right. Fantastic. If you have not already noticed, we are recording. If you would please be so kind as to mute yourself until we get to the Q&A. So hello. Welcome. My name is Anne Masoni. I am the Dean of the School, the International Center of Photography, and we are thrilled to have you all here today. I want to start by thanking the Society for Photographic Education, who we remain affiliated with and who has been generous enough to let us use their Zoom account for this meeting and all of our meetings. SPE is a member-based organization for those of you who aren't familiar, and we'll be dropping their website in the chat window momentarily. A few protocols, again, as an attendance taking mechanism, less so, but more as a, if you'd like to stay in touch with us via email, please do drop your name and your email if your name isn't already part of your Zoom identity in the chat window to me directly, and I will make sure that you get on our mailing list. Again, my name is Anne Masoni for those of you guys who just joined. We ask that you all are on mute so that our presenters can begin our meeting. We'll open up the meeting to the larger audience once they've completed their presentation, so please stay in mute until then. Once we wrap up presentations, please do stick around for an informal conversation. We also will ask that you use the chat feature moving forward with questions so that Betsy, John, and I can help to get those to Terry. And the last thing I'm going to say is this thing that I say every week, which is we are establishing the way forward in this shifting time, and certainly we can do that together. So welcome to FotoFika, and over to you, John.
Hey, everybody. Let's see. I'm going to get my... There we go. Hey, how's everybody doing?
Hey.
All right. So I'm John Fryer, and I'm an associate professor of cross-disciplinary media at Virginia Commonwealth University, and I'm really excited to have you all here and be here for FotoFika. We've been working on this project since March of last year, and a lot of the work that we've been doing is around resources that we've been able to add to this website that I'm going to open up and show you. But also we spent most of the summer working on the FotoFika 2020 All-Star project, which is a trading card project based loosely on Mike Mandel's photographer's trading card project from '72. We are in the midst of launching a Kickstarter so that we can produce 10 sets of 50 baseball cards. So we'll have 500 cards that people can participate in. And we had students from institutions around the United States and around the country, your students, submit. And we reached out to reviewers and people in the photo world to select from all the students that submitted a set of all-stars and write a short review about them. So we've just updated the site at 2020 All-Stars, and I'm going to show you where you can look at all of the students that were selected for review, the reviews that were written by professionals in the field, And then the process what we're in right now is having a designer work with us to make the cards into a physical form. So I'm going to share my screen so you can see. I should have been sharing my screen while talking here, but we're all right. Yeah, so this is, I'm so excited because it just went live right now. And I'll put a link into the chat for you to look at if you want to look at it on your own time. But essentially, all of the students that were selected by working professionals in the field of photography are listed here, and they've been noted as an all-star. And they're, you know, the statement that they wrote, and then a short statement by a professional in the field has been added. So it's something, it's been, you know, one of the goals of this was to have it so that our students who were really robbed of this opportunity to have their work seen and have people from the field be able to see their work and comment on it, we wanted to create an opportunity for that. So excited to share this with you today. And then I just also wanted to show you, I want to be brief because I want to make sure there's time for our guest. But so we're in the process of working with a designer, and we're going to make 10 decks of 50 cards each that'll look a little bit something like this. And each deck will contain cards, 50 cards from people that everybody who submitted, every one who's been selected to be an all-star, and then also there'll be a card of the various reviewers that have been involved in the project. So I don't know if you can sense how excited I am about this thing happening, but it's been something that we started, I think, in April of last year, and you know we're able to get 385 students to submit, and reached out to people across the field who were very generous with their time and excited to participate. And over the summer, wrote a whole set of reviews. So we'll be sending you information about the Kickstarter when it goes live. But and one of the goals of the Kickstarter is actually to get a deck of cards to everybody who participated. So we'll talk about that at another time.
John, didn't we just get the very last reviewer that we needed in order to have the deck be fully complete?
Yes, we did. So we chose the number. We shot for 134 reviewers, so that there would be 134 all-stars, because Mike Mandel's original card deck from 72 was there were 134 cards. And as of last week, we had 133 reviewers until Anne's colleague, David Campany, was on board. So now he is the 134th. So thanks, Anne, for making that happen. And with that, I want to turn the mic and the program over to Betsy so she can get to talking to Terry, who I think we're mostly all here to see.
Right. Thank you, John. And I'm Betsy Schneider, and I am the founder of the ASU Online Digital Photography Program and a faculty associate at Emerson College. I never introduced myself, but you guys do, so I thought I needed to do that. So we've started this discussion about critique. John and Anne and I have been talking a lot about it lately, and thinking that it's an issue that's come up for a number of reasons now, but in our kind of initial discussion with Terry, I posited all these ideas for like why now, and is it something about this generation and what's going on? And without stealing his thunder about what he's going to talk about, I think he said to me, you know, people were asking these questions 40 years ago too. So I think it's interesting to revisit, and not even revisit, but kind of think about critique and think about how things are changing, but how things aren't changing. But also for me, as you know, after 20 years of teaching, I'm starting to realize that there's there's been a certain amount of arrogance in how I teach and how I teach critique, and needing to teach the idea of critique and what it means and why it's valuable was something that I assumed for many years. I just walked into the class and you have your 12 to 15 students and you shoot from the hip and you teach what you know intuitively. And I realized that that's not good enough anymore. And so we started this partly talking about critique. But anyway, so we are really lucky that Terry's agreed to come. He is, as probably most of you know, literally wrote the book on critique, a book that came out last year called Crits, and the book that I think most of us have known for a long time, Criticizing Photographs, which is scheduled to have, is it the 6th edition coming out?
Yes.
By Routledge next spring. So we are so lucky to have Terry here. So I'm gonna hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm nervous, but glad to be here. Talking about, how long ago this began. When I was in my 20s, I did my first, led my first critique with students, and it didn't go very well. And that was way back. And at the time, Minor White and Henry Holmes Smith and Ralph Hattersley had also written some of our critiques and difficulties they were having. So that's how long ago this venture began for me. And it really began from my teaching. And I wrote the first version of Criticizing Photographs for my students, and I used that book in teaching them. I used a draft of them. So that's just a brief introduction. That I've been at it for a long time. You've been at it a long time, and so here we are. Okay, can you see my title slide?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm calling this. This is a PowerPoint, but it's very brief. I have like 12 slides total, and really they're talking points, things that we can come back to. I will watch the time here, and I won't go over 20 minutes, and probably less than that, and then open it up, and I hope that it becomes interactive among all of us, because that's how I think crits should be. I think they ought to be group critiques. I think they ought to be interactive. I'm not so much in favor of the critique as the professor telling students. I'm much more interested in a community of learners. The professor's part of it, but it's not me to them, or yeah. It's not, and that's probably the biggest thing I have to offer, is to put more responsibility on the students and to put more responsibility on us as to how to figure out how to get the students involved and independent of us. I think critiques tend to make students very dependent on our opinions about their work. And I think we all want independent artists. So we're training them to be dependent on us for 2 or 3 years, and then they graduate, and then it's like, okay, now they're on their own. I think they should be on their own in a sense much earlier. And I think a good place to start is with critiques. And it's interesting how we use the term critique. This is off the top of my head, but I don't teach critique. I mean, that's like a foreign usage to me. I have critiques of art with students, but I don't think there's such a thing as critique, but we use it as a noun as if we all agree on what it is. And I think there are as many different critiques as there are groups of people. So that's something that's, anyway, clearly we're in troubled times. That's why we're here on Zoom, because of the pandemic, of course. But I think the troubles are bigger than the pandemic. I think the hatred we have going on in our own country, across the world, the environmental peril, poverty, racism, sexism, all these huge problems. I think that's what we ought to be addressing in photography education. It's not that we're going to solve any of those, but I think we can work to contribute towards solutions to them. And if we're not, I don't know what we're doing. And I don't know why we would make pictures when the world is falling apart. I mean, it's just not enough. I think we want to do more than that. So I want to say that critiques are different from criticism. And the basis of this brief presentation is that critiques would be better if they were more like criticism. And we confuse our students when they leave the program. They think critiques are criticism, and they're not. They're a form of criticism, and they're usually very judgmental. The critiques are. So when the students go out into the world, they think they have to critique everything and they have to critique every image they see. And I just think that's not the best way to go about living life in the world or looking at art. The Bloomsbury book just came out last year. It's called Crits, a Student Manual. And that's written directly to students. Professors are only mentioned, as third person. It's very much the book's to students and it's for students, and it's to give them independence in the critique process. Criticizing photographs is very different than that. Criticizing photographs is how professional writers, how professional thinkers, how professional critics, what do they do when they talk about images, when they look at images, when they write about images? And I think we can learn from them and use those kinds of things in our crits, but I don't think we do that enough. Of course, these are all personal opinions and I'm probably stating them too strongly, but that's okay. It's just a short 10 minutes. So critiques, I think generally, as they're done around the country, they're usually for the makers. And it's usually for the makers to make better pictures, make better images. And I think that's just really limited. I think if it were more like criticism, where criticism is discourse, it's discussion, it's for a public, and it's to improve society and to improve social discourse. And by improving social discourse, hopefully there are benefits to society. And that's how I would like to see critiques modeled, so that we just have much bigger concerns than making a better image. Critiques usually give advice to artists. Criticism, however, the critics describe, they interpret, they consider consequences of imagery. Perhaps they judge, but if you pick up, an issue of Aperture, you're not going to find it full of judgments. You're going to find it more discourse that is descriptive and interpretive and looking at consequences of images. And you're not going to find professional critics giving advice to artists. That would really be insulting to artists. But I'm afraid that too often we sort of encourage students to think in a critique fashion rather than in a criticism fashion. And criticism itself is it's just a bad term, but we're stuck with it in the English language. It really should be discussion or thinking about art rather than criticizing art or criticizing photographs. Because in that term, we got negativity built right into it, and it reduces the whole process to judgment. And it's usually negative judgment. Fault finding, you could be better if you did this, why don't you try this? It's a lot of, it's just a lot of advice from student to student or from professor to student, and it's usually professor to student. And a lot of times students ask for that, and I want to make them independent. so that they're asking themselves and they're asking one another, rather than always going to the professor to say, you know, how do I make this better? Or is this good enough? Or what, you know, is this a good intent or whatever? So I'm for less advice and more discussion. And I want the photographer, the artist, to listen to the discussion and make their own conclusions about what to change, if they want to change anything in their image. My goal in a critique is not to get them to change something, it's for me to get them to think and to wonder and to be excited and to make better stuff and to be better people in a group. I think we need to have a specific purpose for any critique, and then we need to remind the group what the purpose is. So today, the purpose might be that we're working on artist's intent, and we want to see if your intents match your images. So that's what we're going to work on: artist's intent versus the images that you're making. How articulate are you about your intent? Do the photographs match up to it? Is the intent worthwhile to begin with? So that might be the focus of the critique. On another day, I want to just practice interpreting images, trying to get thoughts about what images make us think, make us feel, make us wonder about, make us curious about. So we'll just do interpretation without judgment. And another day we might do description only. I think critics spend a lot of time, professional critics spend a lot of time describing what they're talking about and the world in which it was made. And we don't do that in critiques. We assume that, oh, it's up on the wall, you see it, I see it, we all see it, let's move on. Let's move on to make it better, usually, to be a little sarcastic about it. And I think we could really slow it down by asking for description. One of the biggest problems that professors, instructors raise is, how do I get students to talk? I mean, time after time after time, when I was giving workshops or giving talks, that's the first question: how do I get them to talk? My students won't talk. How do I get them going? And the easiest way is to ask them to simply describe what they see. What do you see? So in a class of 15, we'll have maybe, I'll let them pick, or I'll pick one image, and I'll ask them to go around the room one by one and say, Betsy, tell us one thing you see in the image. Anne, pick it up from there. Davis, pick it up from there. And we go around the whole room, and then we see if we can do it again. And if we have a complex, sophisticated image, we can certainly do it. If the image is just too simple or simplistic, you know, it gets 2 or 3 comments and then it's exhausted. So that's a judgment right there that we don't even have to articulate. I mean, if we get the image in 2 or 3 descriptive statements, it's probably, you know, not too much going on there, which is why I want to stress description and interpretation, so that there's more going on in the images. I want the critiques to be interactive. I don't start with the artist talking about his or her intent for the work, which I know is a traditional way to start. This is my current portfolio. This is what I'm trying to do. This is where it's going. This is where I think it should go. I don't encourage that kind of talk in a group critique. Individually, one-on-one, of course, me with a student, of course. But in a group critique, I want them, the artist, to put the work up and let us figure out what the intent is. Is there an intent? Is there a cohesive intent? Is it coming across? What are the 20 different ones of us who are looking at it? What do each of us come up with? If the artist could listen to that, that would be a tremendous benefit to them. That's a big if the artist can listen to us. In my experience, artists whose work is being critiqued don't listen. Or they listen, but they don't retain. They listen, but they don't understand. They listen so that they can defend. And that's just not a good way to go about it. So this is a key finding of my work with critiques. If you ask a question, don't answer it, wait, and then wait longer, and then wait longer. And someone will break the silence. someone will say something and then you can get it going. But if you ask a question, get nervous, and then you start answering your own question, it's over. It's no longer a group critique, it's a spontaneous lecture that you have not prepared, and it's probably not a very good lecture. So that's the crucial thing. And I teach art teachers to run critiques. And that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest failure. They'll go into a classroom and they'll have some lively sixth graders, and the sixth graders will be ready to go. And then they ask a question and the sixth graders stare at them. And then the teachers get nervous and they start explaining. So that's just crucial. I can't stress that enough. Call on individuals by name. I don't, sometimes I'll open the discussion by asking a question that I pre-formulated of the whole group and see if someone answers and wait until that happens. But other than that, I'll ask a question. I'll leave quiet time so that people can reflect on the question. If I ask a good question, they need time to think about a good answer. I don't want the first thing that pops into their mind. So I don't want fast conversations during critiques. I want to slow it down. There's a whole movement in the museum education world called slow looking. I think we need more slow looking. And by looking, I mean also, discussing. So call an individual by name and say, Davis, can you help us out here? Could you get us started? Another thing I'll do is, I'll have names in a hat, and I'll pull out a name and say, Jane, you're up, get us going, say something. And then I'll give her time to do that. And then I'll say, oh, that's good. Anne, can you respond to something that Jane just said? And then we, it tells the students right away that we're all in this, that no one can slack off. You can't just hang out in the background in the corner, hoping that you won't be called on, or you can't dominate. If you're one of the people who are very talkative, you can't control the critique. It's a shared communal event among 15, 25 people, or 6 or 7, depending on. And I think what I'm saying applies to Zoom also, but we'll have to figure out specific techniques to do that. So I'm just talking generally, not specifically about Zoom. Let's see. Critiques tend to be competitive. Art schools tend to be competitive. I think we'd be a better society if we worked cooperatively and if we built that into critiques. And I can foster that as a facilitator of critiques. And when I run a critique, I'm not the critic. I'm a facilitator of a discussion about art. And I want to have a good discussion because I don't want to be bored. And I don't want the students to be bored. And I don't want to hear myself talking. I want to get a conversation going, and I want to keep the conversation going. And depending on the time of the year or the time of the semester or quarter, maybe you won't talk about everyone's images today. And once I know that, I'll let them know that. Or if I go into the critique and I'll say, look, we have an hour, we have 15 students, you all have 3 images. I mean, if we talked about every image of every student, you'd have about 2.5 seconds each. And that's just not very beneficial to anyone, I don't think. You can do that one-on-one, but when you do that as in part of a group, I don't think you get very far or get much accomplished, except everyone feels like they've been somewhat recognized. Some kids don't want their work critiqued, so I'll go into a class and I say, okay, who wants their work talked about today? And some will, some really want it. They want their work considered, and others don't, either because they're shy or because they didn't really put the effort in and they know it, or they didn't have time to do the work. I've been involved in a lot of personal psychology over the years, and I love group psychology. And one of the best psychologists I ever had, she'd have us in a group and she said, okay, who wants to work today? And you either did or you didn't. And if you didn't, fine, just chill out and listen, contribute. But if you want to work, this is going to be work. And I kind of think critiques ought to be somewhat similar to that. Maybe not as nerve-wracking, but anyway. This is another major finding, which probably goes against the grain. Consider keeping the artist out of the discussion. Let them be a listener, an absorber, a fly on the wall, and let the crit be for the benefit of the group as well as the listening artist. If I want to benefit the artist, I can do that individually in the hall or during office hours or on a one-to-one Zoom setup. But I'm more interested in getting a group discussion, a community going. And in my experience, as I've said, artists, they don't retain what's being said because they're too nervous. So I encourage them to be quiet. I don't allow them to talk. I don't allow other students to ask them what they meant by their image or why they did this or that. I just let the students say, tell us what you think about the image, and let the artist listen and determine what to do about it, if anything, later. We don't have to always be directing the artist as what to do. I had a lot of MFA committees at large university with some brilliant faculty members. There'd be 3 or 4 star faculty members talking about a grad student's work, and at the end of those discussions, I'd pull the student aside and I'd say, what did you get from that? What did you hear? And they say, I don't know. I'm just so glad it's over. I don't know. And it's like, all these thoughts are flying around that are very high powered. A lot of the thoughts are to impress the other faculty members rather than the student. But if the student could just record those literally with a tape recorder, with their iPhone, or take notes, or just chill out and benefit from the wisdom that's going around the room. And I don't like the students asking the artists questions. I want the students to figure out for themselves, what have they seen, what are the consequences of what they see, rather than always asking the artist. But those are some of the bad habits I think we get into with critiques. This should be the first slide. Successful critiques leave everyone wanting to make more art and to be better citizens. I'm throwing in and to be better citizens because that's what I think we need in our troubled times. But I think critiques we ought to be able to look forward to them, and we ought to leave the critique, no matter what, wanting to make more stuff or different stuff, but not to be discouraged or bummed out. I don't think it's our job to discourage people from making images or to get them to change majors. They're bright enough to figure out eventually whether they're going to make it or not. We don't have to tell them that, or that doesn't have to be the purpose of the critique. Especially in the beginning courses. I know that some courses are gatekeeping courses for the major. Well, that student who comes in as a freshman or sophomore into Photo 101, that might be the last art course they ever have, because you discourage them and they never want to look at an artwork again because their feelings have been hurt. So you've ruined art for them for a long time. And if that sounds exaggerated, I mean, in the book Crits, I have all kinds of stories of students who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, still wounded by a critique, by a well-meaning professor who just blew it and ruined their attitude. And I don't want to do that. Somehow we got to create critiques that people look forward to rather than dread. I used to look forward to them. I used to look forward to conducting them. It was like, okay, I don't have to teach f-stops and shutter speeds. I can get a discussion about art going. That's pretty exciting. And the students look forward too, because they weren't always, beating them down or criticizing or finding fault with what they did. This is the final slide. I don't know the source, but I love it. What do you get by discouraging an artist? Nothing, absolutely fucking nothing. I picked that up on the web and I've been trying to track down who said it, but I don't have the source. So those are my comments, and now let's open it up to anyone.
All right, thank you. Yeah, Betsy? I bet you have.
Yeah, I hate silence and I always have to give the answers. And well, other people are thinking of questions because I hope you have them. And ironically, one of the things I want to talk about is I was struck by how much this is about the professor's ego, checking your own ego while you're teaching. I wrote it a bunch of times, and how to get there as a professor, how to sit back and not feel that pressure to deliver a pronouncement. How sometimes you want the students to feel better, sometimes, but what I heard from you a lot was our job really is often to just make ourselves less, not the center of the experience.
Yeah, make the work, make the student artist the center, make the group of students the center, because they're going to graduate and you're not going to be there. And they need to learn how to do that now when they're in school, I think. Again, I'm not discounting one-on-one conversations. I'm talking about in a group, in a classroom.
Yeah, and
I think
And
I
Terry,
identify pressure, Betsy, because I mean, especially with graduate students, I feel like, wow, they're paying big tuition. I better say something brilliant
Yeah.
here because, you know,
yeah.
I'm the guru. Well, I got to get rid of that.
hey Terry, can you stop sharing your screen
Sure.
so we can see you and Betsy and Anne?
So
Thank you. Awesome.
I want to actually the next question, the question that I think might be a longer thing. As you were going through the list, the next question is about suggesting teaching online, how to transfer this online. One of the things I was thinking while you were talking also is some of these rules or ideas or concepts are very specific to an in-person or, as you said, on Zoom. But I think there's many points that you made that can apply to an asynchronous critique, can apply to a large group of students even. So I just want to throw that out there as maybe something that we might not solve right this minute, but a continuing conversation about that, about which of these ideas that you've covered. And I jumped in and talked about the ego issue, but anyway, just to throw that out there about.
I would encourage the students to get on Zoom among the 4 or 5 of them, you know, with their friends. They don't need the professor to be there all the time. Get feedback. Joseph Kudelka came to New York years ago with a box of photographs and not much English, and he just showed them to people on the street. He'd stop people and have them look, and he would just observe them observing his work. You know, I mean, they don't, yeah.
So we do have some questions that are starting to fill the chat. I'm gonna probably pull these out of order just because as I'm watching them come through. But the one of them have you thought about or written about how social media has influenced how students critique? All positive, what I like, what's best is what is bright and eye-catching, etc.
I haven't, well, I thought about it because I use iPhone and I'm on Instagram and Facebook. We see a tremendous number of images, you know, greater than we have in my earlier life. But I think that's something to recognize, but it's somehow we still have to slow it down, slow the viewing down, because Instagram is very fast. I go through a couple hundred, you know, in a sitting at least. Another thing that Instagram and Facebook, they encourage like. I like it, I like it, I like it. I don't allow like in the classroom. I don't let the word like be used. I make them change their, change their vocabulary and say something like, I appreciate this aspect of what I'm looking at, rather than I like it, I don't like it. Because frankly, I don't care if you like it. I want to know what it's about. Perhaps, is it good? Is it worth, you know, the space it's taking up on the wall? Whether you like it or not, that's your preference. You get to like whatever you want. You can like whatever. So, and that would improve, if we could just do that one, that would improve critiques tremendously. Just get rid of the word like.
and that's something I have done forever. And you know, so and I bring it back to social media. I say, like, it's like the like button. You liking something does not matter. Like, you know, you need to add, you know, yes and an add to the thing. So yeah, I ban like. So there's lots of creative ways to say that you prefer something. I mean, my students have gone through the gamut of finding different similes for like.
I
And
love
yeah,
that.
Andy
I
suggested
like, yeah, Andy's suggestion.
we use a buzzer from
Go
the
ahead.
game Taboo. Eh.
We also had a question back, I'm scrolling backwards now. Do you have any suggestions for conducting a critique via an online class, slideshows, sharing screens, etc.? Has there, you know, do you have a preference as in this particular moment of that lack of the physicality of the prints on the wall?
Well, I'm as new with Zoom as you are. I've been giving some Zoom talks, and my wife and another writer and I are working on a project, and we share what we're doing on Zoom. And I think, yeah, let the student put up a slideshow, you know, 6 images, and then another student do 6 images and get people to talk about them. I mean, you have to, and I'm not teaching daily anymore. So you're going to come up with better ideas, or the students will get good ideas. Ask them how they want their work to be seen, how they want it to be looked at. So I don't have a lot of answers to that one.
I'll do a little plug for our talk on December 2nd. Ben Guest from the International Center of Photography has actually developed a new software called Ache, which is actually built specifically for photographers, specifically for an online critique. And while we have certainly shown quite a few different approaches here, starting back last spring, I'll be curious to see if you all find it useful. He's definitely interested in beta testing it with you guys as well.
Part of that one.
I just want to say too, there are great suggestions coming out. We'll collect them. So if you guys continue to have suggestions of how you're implementing some of these ideas, that's great. Sorry, Anne, go ahead. You're gonna.
Yeah, I was just gonna go to Carlos Diaz's question. How does a critique strategy approach change when you are a visiting professor versus the resident professor?
I think there are advantages because I don't know the work. I don't know where it came from. I don't know if it was shot on campus or, you know, at the popular corner store. I'm an outsider, and that's a benefit, because when I go into a gallery, I'm an outsider. The artist isn't there telling me, you know, what they meant to do. So I find that to be an advantage. And one technique I've used over the years is to have one class talk about the work of another class without the class being there, because then they're not defending, you know, they're exploring. Or sometimes I've done this with kids. It was really wonderful. 3rd graders and kindergartners. It was in a school, we're talking about artworks, paintings of animals by masters, 20th century masters. And there wasn't enough time for me to visit the kindergartners. So the kindergartner teacher said, can I just bring my kids there and let them listen? And I said, yeah, sure. Why not? So they did, and they sat there so politely. And the 3rd and 4th graders got to explain to the little kids about these images. And it was one of the best discussions I had, because they took ownership. See, and with critiques, we take ownership.
Yeah.
We professors take ownership. We got to somehow get it back to the students.
So what are your thoughts on facilitating discussion with the public, in parentheses, who may have no art education versus college level crits?
I love those opportunities. And the conversations are usually more fascinating than with art majors, because art majors or photography majors, they tend to slip into the, you know, the dialogue that we're used to, the terminology that we're used to. And a lot of times they'll tell you what they already know. So like when I like, if I use the work of, say, Cindy Sherman to have a discussion, if it's with art majors, they end up telling me all that they've read about Cindy Sherman. And I don't want to know that at that time. I mean, it's good to read, but that's not what we're about here. But if I get lay people in there and they, they can really get somewhere and they can find out how powerful their minds are. I think museum educators have taught the public that they need a great museum to tell them how to think about art. You need the art historian. And when I'm in a gallery, an art gallery in a museum, I've been several times when I've had a really good discussion going about a work of art, and a curator will walk by and she'll overhear it, or he'll overhear it and say, well, no, that's not really it. He really did that work back in 1948 up on the farm. And so they tell some story, it's like, we don't care, go away, keep moving. We're not here to learn these facts about the artwork. We're here to stimulate discussion and ideas. And we want to talk about being human, not being better artists. How do we be deeper humans?
That's actually a good segue into Harris's question, which I think relates to a certain form of critique that involves firing names of artists, not even just firing names of other artists, but I often find myself in this place where I want them to hear about related artists, but I also feel like sometimes that can be a way of really shooting students down. Do you have thoughts that Harris is asking? Do you have thoughts about bring the advantages and pitfalls of recommending artists or their monographs? What are your thoughts?
But not necessarily during critiques. I mean, I assume that we're going to have some kind of lectures during the seminar or the course or the semester. We're going to have some kind of group meetings, and that's where I show a lot of different work. The more, the better. During critiques, not so much, because I'm not saying it's bad. I just haven't done that because I don't want to take away from the student work. And of course, a student who's doing something probably isn't going to be as brilliant as Bertinsky or as, spectacular as Gregory Crewdson or something. And I don't want to compare those, those masters with the students. I don't think it really does much good for the students. And if we keep telling the student, oh, that's been done, go see it in the library, that's been done. I mean, yeah, it's been done, but we can't, we got to do something more than that. That's not going to encourage the kid.
And there's a quote from Dwayne Michaels that says, everything's been done before until you do it, which I love. And yeah, I would second that, Terry, in terms of in the classroom and referring to different artists. I do come back to artists when I do presentations later, and I then will frequently refer to a specific student saying, oh, I pulled this because of you, and I know you're interested in this. And that's been helpful in terms of, because so often when you're in the classroom and you're talking about somebody, it's just a name. They don't have a vision. They don't have an idea of what you're talking about. So it's a lot easier when you can actually show it and talk about it when they're not also, people cry in critique, right? Because they feel attacked. So they're not absorbing very much in that space. So I totally wholeheartedly agree with like kind of saving that for other opportunities where you can actually demonstrate and show and they can see.
We do have another question. Do you approach technical issues with beginning students who are just learning about controlling the medium?
Well, that's a good question. My answer is you don't need a group discussion about focus. You can tell them about focus. You don't need a discovery about depth of field. You can tell them about it. So, and I don't call those critiques, because for me, critiques are verb critiques and they're group discussions about works of art. So of course, technique is crucial. But if I want to talk about technique, I'll talk about technique. I don't pretend that, let's have a discussion about this. If that makes sense.
There's some really great suggestions and approaches all around up here.
and we save the chat, and I think what we'll do is likely pull some of your suggestions and put them into a blog post so that we all have access to that. I've also made it so you can unmute yourself if you have a specific question you want to verbally ask Terry as well in our last 10 minutes.
Yeah, we do actually have still a few in the queue. How do you get students to be more critical in a critique about their work? The tendency seems to be about only liking the work for fear of being offensive.
Yeah. Again, I would rephrase the question. I don't mean to be insulting to whoever asked it, but I would say I'm not trying to get them to be more critical. I'm trying to get them to be more thoughtful, more observant, more curious, rather than always picking at themselves or picking at their work or finding what's wrong with it. I just want them to explore more ideas, more possibilities. And in the book crits, some of the students, bring that up. Some of them will say, "I want harsh criticism. Tell me." Most of them don't, but some of them do. Ask for that. But again, it's. I want to leave it up to the artist rather than me bullying them into doing a certain kind of work or a better kind of work because I'm going to give them a grade or I'm going to pass them or not pass them.
One thing struck me while you were talking too was, and this may be an answer to both, was stepping away from this idea of judgment. And the question that was just asked, I have that question. And while you were talking, I thought, wow, okay. Because I do feel like sometimes my job is to let students know if their work is strong or weak. And stepping away from that a little bit, I think, for me was something really, I thought really important that you mentioned. And I think maybe it's that comes back to things we've talked about online culture and liking or not liking. I mean, liking is a judgment, right? It's like on or off.
I have a suggestion that I think is pertinent. If we're talking about Photo 101, we're not going to have deep discussions about beginning photography, beginning photographers' works. They're just not there yet. They need time to develop, which is good. Let them do that. But I think what we want to do is to get them to be more comfortable in talking about one another's images. And then eventually they won't be so worried about hurting other people's feelings. Not that critiques should ever be harsh, but I think they ought to be honest and they ought to be forthright. One technique I would use, instead of let's say we have a beginning photography class, put up an image and ask the students, okay, when you see this image, what do you think about? And go around the room quickly. And then, okay, when you see the same image, what do you feel? And go around the room. The artist is listening and the artist is saying, wow, they're thinking about that, or I didn't think about that, or maybe that's a new direction to go in, or wow, they're really feeling what I meant, or gee, they missed my point. Didn't get it. Blaming the audience rather than themselves. But with reflection, that evening or the next day, it'll sink in. We don't always have to be telling them so directly, I don't think. I don't think it does them much good. I think they have to, they have to own it themselves.
We've had quite a few people make comments about wishing they had taken notes or recorded during critiques when they were a student. And yeah, I think one of the things that in hearing the idea of slow observation, slow looking, is also this idea of really hearing what's being said. And I oftentimes will incorporate the use of a student scribe. So they buddy up at the beginning of the critique and one person is writing. And so the artist doesn't have to write, they can listen, but also so that the scribe has to listen. Because I think that's, again, to this idea of really looking. Sometimes that idea of what we hear is of the moment in the anxiety rather than the actual content itself.
Yeah, good point. One of the things that I try to tell my students is to really prize critiques because it's never going to happen again. You're never going to, once you graduate,
Mhm.
if you have a big show, you're never going to have 15 serious, concerned,
That's so true.
sophisticated artists talking about your work. The most you'll get is nice job or good
Yep.
show, or congratulations,
Yep.
or pass the wine and give you some more cheese. You know, these, you're never going to get this again. Once you're out of school. I mean, you guys know because you show and you just don't get the kind of response that your work really deserves and the work that you could really benefit from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
was just, sorry.
This
I
is
was going to
wasted
say
on the
that,
young.
you know, having taught the BFAs for the last 5 years at VCU, it really does come true. I'm always telling them that, like, you have this cohort that's so serious and they're really thinking about you and your work, and no one is going to ask you about your work ever again. Which is not true because they form different crit groups after the fact, but like, it is this is the time.
We've had a couple of questions and sort of voting up of the idea of if you're teaching in a more commercial space, how would you apply these ideas while still measuring to industry standards?
You mean like commercial photography, fashion photography, or product photography? I think the same applies. When you look at this image, what do you think about? When you look at this image, what do you feel? Why do you think about that? Why do you feel that? You know, what's denoted, and then what are all the connotations of your choice of that model with this fabric, and you know, with this background, with this setting. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff to talk about. It's not just, I hope it's not just technique. And also I would want to push them on what are they selling? What are they selling to humanity? You know, what are they promoting to humanity? So that, yeah, that might be a harder question to ask, but that's the question I want to ask.
So
Because we can promote positive things with, you know, commercials. They're not always, yeah, it doesn't have to be shallow and glitzy.
Carlos Diaz has just asked a question, and unfortunately it went direct message to me because I think it's such a really great question, and we don't have the time to get to it. So it is the reason we collect these questions, is so that we can take them back to our guests and also dig deep into some of the topics that you all bring up. But he writes, this could really be a separate Zoom topic, yes, but how does Terry suggest weaving discussions regarding race, gender, difference into a group critique and still maintain an equilibrium?
Oh yeah, that's a wonderful question, and that's a major concern of mine. That's, you know, that's from the first slide. You know, we need to talk about racism, we need to talk about sexism, we need to talk about poverty. We need to talk about those things, and any way that I can get that going in a productive way, in a hopefully not hurtful way, and without calling on, oh, you know, Jose, you're the Hispanic here, tell us about your Hispanic experience. But we got to learn how to do that as a society. We need it. I mean, it's crucial. And I don't have all the answers as to how to do it, but I know I want to try. And I know I have tried. And when that has happened, wonderful things have happened. When I was at University of North Texas, we saw Carol Walker's retrospective at the Modern, and we had a mixed group, mixed racial group, sex group. And we had wonderful discussions. They're really honest, really forthright. And people did cry, but not because they were hurt, because they were moved. I think crying in critiques is wonderful. They're not crying about their feelings being hurt, if they're crying about, wow, something happened here.
I just want to say, I think we should think about having a session where we talk more about this, because it is a huge issue, but that was a great answer, Terry, I think, to what's a huge topic.
My best teaching experience was before I retired. I was at University of North Texas and I was teaching art education. I was pretty relaxed at the time because I was on the off ramp, so to speak. And I was relaxed with the student, but also very honest. And I wasn't there to waste my time. and I wasn't there to promote bad art teaching. So we would really get into really good discussions about all these controversial topics. But we did it in a way that people really listened and really shared. And inevitably someone would be crying. And they had a joke that they told me later. They'd say, well, what'd you cry today? What did you cry about today in Barrett's class? Or they'd go home and their wife would say, well, what'd you cry today about? So that's how intimate that group got. It was my best teaching experience. And I think I'm still in contact with some of those students through, email and whatnot.
So we are past the hour, and I want to just take this opportunity to thank Terry for joining us today. So appreciate all that you've contributed to photography and photo criticism and critique. And thank you for just the time you've given us all today. And we do meet again on December 2nd, and we will have Ben Guest with us, who will be talking about his software Ache, and he's looking forward to having you all beta test it. So thank you for being with us today.
And
Thank you, everyone.
thanks, everybody. And 2 weeks from then, I have a colleague, Jonathan Molina Garcia, who's going to join us also talking about critique. So I think what we'll do is steer some of the things we've pulled from here into the upcoming conversations as well. So thanks, everybody, for being here. And Liz pointed out, too, that that Anne has developed this really fantastic inclusive database list that we have also posted to FotoFika. So that I just put in the chat, which does give us an opportunity to kind of look at things that are in the classroom, that are photographers, that are going to our libraries, etc. So great to see everybody. And we'll stick around for a little bit before we close up.